And that's precisely the history of the interpretation of Revelation. It seems like every single generation is like, aha, it's talking about now. I can identify who this strange monster is. I know who the 666 monstrous beast is and its ex-political figure. And this is precisely what the history of Christian interpretation of this text has been.
What is going on in the book of Revelation? Hey, I'm Jordan, and this is the Bible and Archaeology podcast, the place for conversations and questions about the lands, civilizations, and archaeology of the Bible. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Rebekah Haigh, a professor here at the University of Iowa, to explore the book of Revelation. This is one of those texts that you've heard many things about, but is often very misunderstood because of the way it was written and what it assumes you know coming into the reading of the text. So today, we're going to start to unpack some of the assumptions that this text has that, if you're missing, can lead you to misunderstand what it is saying. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you've ever had questions about the book of Revelation, I think you're going to enjoy it as well. Remember, for early access to ad-free video podcasts and an exclusive bonus podcast, you can join us over on Patreon. We are Bible and Arc on Patreon. But for now, settle in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation all about the book of Revelation. Dr. Haigh, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk today about a topic that, as we were saying, I think to our shame, we haven't covered yet, Revelation. I know one of those things as I'm looking through the catalog that I'm like, we really haven't done this one yet. So thank you for coming to fill in this very important gap for us.
Now, was it dread? I don't want to touch this hot potato.
Well, I mean, I don't
2-foot pole.
I don't think I would say dead, but fear of my own incompetence and not knowing what to talk about. Well, because I think this is one of those things that's filled with all these topics that can send people down rabbit holes. You got beasts, you got numbers, you have violence, you have end times. What's going on? That it has this reputation as a thing of mystery or horror or confusion. And for many people, it opens like all kinds of doors.
Literally, there are doors that are opened in Revelation.
Yeah. So for someone who immediately is coming in and saying, like, I clicked on this because I don't get Revelation at all. Like, I don't understand what's happening. If you're just trying to walk someone into the topic to start, where do you begin?
Well, usually at the beginning is a good place. John, who is the author of Revelation, kind of sets us up to understand the text, or at least he sets up the ancient readers to understand his text. He talks about how he's hanging out on the Isle of Patmos, presumably because of some sort of persecution relating to Jesus, potentially. So he's been exiled there. Exile is a punishment we do see in the Roman Empire. So he's done something. He's been exiled to Patmos, and he is in a vision. He's having a vision. He's in the Spirit on the Lord's day, is what he tells us. So he's having some sort of ecstatic experience, some sort of out-of-body experience. And he sees the heavens opened, and he sees this kind of terrifying vision of a figure that he calls one like the Son of Man. And very much, if you're reading Revelation 1 and you know anything about Daniel, you're like, aha, this is Daniel. And he's definitely reworking the apocalyptic imagery that we see in Daniel. And he's recalling this tradition about a divine someone who looks like a son of man, who is a messianic figure who's going to come at the end of days. And what he's doing is he's linking it to Jesus. And so this figure tells him, you're going to need to write down all the stuff that you're about to see. It's wild and crazy. You're going to need to write it down. And you're going to need to warn your readers, your listeners, that they need to like shape up because shit is about to hit the fan, right? The Roman Empire is about to fall. The Son of Man, me, Christ, is about to come back and remake the world into this messianic utopia. But before that happens, there's going to be a lot of war and violence and scary things. So you need to shape up. And so John does precisely that, and he writes it all down. And this is the book of Revelation.
So would you say it's fair that it has earned this kind of reputation as maybe not weird, but odd or hard or confusing text because of everything that it has? Like, is it fair to have that type of approach to it, or is it really not that weird or that hard if we come at it from the right angle?
No, it's a great question. And I think so much of the misunderstanding of the book of Revelation is because of the genre. So we have Gospels in the New Testament and we have epistles. We know what a gospel is. We know what a letter is. And we get to the very end of the canon. We get to the book of Revelation and it's its own unique genre. And it's a Jewish genre. It's something that if you are a literate person living in the time of the first century, living in the Second Temple period, you would know what it is. And you would kind of have a toolkit to decode all of the strange symbols and imagery that's in Revelation, because this is apocalyptic literature.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this genre of apocalyptic literature gets its name from the book of Revelation, from this word apocalypse, which literally means an unveiling. But Revelation is not the origin of this literature. Revelation is not the first revelatory text. We have texts like the Book of Enoch and texts like Daniel that are trading in these generic elements. We have usually a visionary, in this case John, who ascends into the heaven or has an out-of-body experience. We have strange symbolism, usually drawing on each other. So Revelation draws on Daniel, the Book of Enoch, and Daniel are also drawing on earlier prophetic traditions as well. So a lot of monsters and different things that are happening in the cosmos and a heavenly temple, a lot of similar imagery. And it's all kind of like in code because they're using these images to talk about empire. So in the book of Daniel, we're talking about the Seleucid Empire. And in the book of Revelation, we're talking about the Roman Empire. It's not going to puzzle the insiders. They know who's being talked about. They understand the symbolic imagery. But it might puzzle outsiders. It might puzzle Romans, for instance. So yes, it is a weird and unusual text, but perhaps not for the insiders who understand the language and they can speak it.
Who is that original insider audience that this was intended to be for? Because if we're approaching it, we are outsiders to that.
Right.
Who does it have in mind as this insider group that might know some of this other literature to approach or might know some of the names it wants you to know to come in? Who does it have in mind?
Well, that's a really interesting question because Revelation has been interpreted and understood for several millennia as a Christian text, as a text written to Gentile followers of Jesus, mostly Gentile followers of Jesus. And that's probably not the case. Increasingly, scholars understand the book of Revelation as a text that's written for a Jewish audience. John himself, our author, John is a Jewish name. It's a Hellenistic Jewish name. His Greek is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. It's not great Greek. It seems like it's his second language. Maybe he speaks Aramaic as his first language. So he's not a Gentile. He's a Jewish author. And even from the opening chapters, Revelation 2 through 3, it's clear that he at least intends his text to be read or heard more likely by a Jewish audience. He talks about the various churches, which is a bad translation, the various ecclesiae that are in Asia Minor, these assemblies of Jesus followers, and the various conflicts that they're having. And the conflicts that they're having kind of clue us into who they are. The conflicts are eating meat sacrificed to idols. So worries about food and perhaps kosher laws, worries about impurity, keeping pure, avoiding porneia, avoiding idolatry, and practicing the Torah, keeping the commandments of God. These are sort of the cluster of things that John is concerned that his audience is not doing. Those are very Jewish things.
Right.
Those are not things that non-Jews are worried about. They're not necessarily worried about not eating food sacrificed to idols. In fact, Paul seems to be okay with that, at least for Gentiles, and presumably they took him at his word because that's sort of where Christianity went. But our author, not so much, not okay with that. And he also talks about this group twice in Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, who say they are Jews, the Judaioi, but are not, but are lying. So clearly John is writing to people who can actually claim to be this ethnic group, to be Judaioi, to be Judeans or Jews, depending on your translation, and that they should be keeping a more rigorous Judaism, practicing the Torah, avoiding meat sacrificed to idols, avoiding anything that smacks of idolatry, because the world's about to end and it matters. So this is John's audience.
If the audience has been misunderstood in the past, are there significant problems that you think someone coming into this and listening through and saying, well, here's what I think I know about this. Things in that reading that have emerged out of misidentifying the intended audience or maybe trying to force this into the wrong audience that listeners today or readers of this text need to identify for themselves to begin to correct their understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And that thing is, if you're not reading the audience as Jewish and the author as Jewish, you're not reading it as a Jewish text. And if you're not reading it as a Jewish text, you're thinking of it as a new thing. John's doing something new. And so we can interpret it from a fresh slate. We don't have to think about what is the code language? What is the language of apocalyptic? We don't have to look to the Book of Enoch or to Daniel. We don't have to look to the Dead Sea Scrolls to understand things about violence and prayer, to understand Revelation. We can just understand it on its own terms. And if you want to understand Revelation on its own terms, outside of a Jewish context, it's going to be a very strange text. And it's anyone's game, right? And that's precisely the history of the interpretation of Revelation. It seems like every single generation is like, aha, it's talking about now. I can identify who this strange monster is. I know who the 666 monstrous beast is and its ex-political figure. And this is precisely what the history of Christian interpretation of this text has been.
The code cracking comes out of that misunderstanding of the reading.
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
If we're then looking at some of those common features or symbols or tropes that emerge in this through the lens of a Jewish audience and Jewish literature, are there any of them, like a 666 or this creature, that suddenly move into a way that should make a lot more sense for individuals? Like if there's just a couple you could put into people's minds today to say, hey, maybe you've really misunderstood this one.
Yeah.
To reframe it.
Yeah.
Demystify it, de-horrify it maybe, to say, think of it this way, and suddenly it opens up all new kinds of doors. Like, where do people need to start?
Yeah. I don't think you can de-horrify Revelation. Like, this is, I'm just going to straight up say, it is a tricky text. It's a violent text. And actually, I would say the opposite, at least in my own research, that one of the moves, so Revelation has been used in a number of ways. One of these ways is to justify violence. So we see Revelation being interpreted by like the Branch Davidians, for instance. I am the Lamb. This is what David Koresh thought. And he wrote a whole commentary on Revelation. And he took the FBI as being like the enemies envisioned in the text of Revelation. And it ended really badly. And this is we do see this across Western tradition of Revelation being used to justify violence. On the other hand, we see an interpretation of Revelation where it's read very pacifistically. So we understand Jesus as someone who is bringing peace and not the sword. Jesus is someone who lays down his life rather than requiring you to go to war on behalf of God. Mm-hmm. And that strand of tradition is in the New Testament. It's not the only strand of tradition that we see in the New Testament, but it is there. And this impulse to read Jesus this way, to understand Christianity this way, inflected another strand of interpretive tradition in Revelation, which was to understand, to diminish the violence, to get around the violence. Oh, it's all symbolic. It's not real. Mm-hmm. Oh, the violence is only happening imaginatively, or it's only happening in the cosmos, or only God is doing the violence, or only the angels are doing the violence. It's not humans. This is a very un-Jewish. It's not like the Jewish texts of the Second Temple period, where they expected to pick up their swords and fight alongside the Messiah. This is a Christian innovation. This is a new Christian theological move where humans don't do that, right? They just wait and endure, and at the end of time, they get their reward. And that's one example of a Christian reading. But if you put Revelation in the context of other Jewish apocalyptic literature that's expecting an end of days, that's thinking about, well, what role do we play in it? It's actually not all that different from those Jewish texts. And that might suggest that actually maybe we don't read this text as a mandate for Christian nonviolence, or at least not in its historical context. So that's one example.
That role of violence, the violent aspect of it, feels unescapable.
Yes.
And opens up just endless doors on door with where you want to go with this. In plugging it back into some of these Jewish contexts, Jewish texts, doesn't feel like it solves anything, as you said. It makes it maybe muddier, not less horrifying.
Yes.
Is it really then fully physical? Is it fully not? Like, does it bounce back and forth between doing these things? And if so, what do we do with that?
Yeah, it definitely does bounce back and forth. And one of the other elements of Revelation has made it so difficult to understand is John plays with time. So on the one hand, he's in a vision, and he's having this vision of a cosmic Christ, of a one like a son of man. And on the other hand, he's writing these letters or dictating these letters on behalf of this cosmic Christ to these historical communities living in the end of the first century in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. And the thing he's dictating to them are instructions, but also this vision, this series of apocalyptic visions that we see in Revelation 4 through the end of the book. And these visions also are doing a lot of bouncing with time. One moment we're in the heavens, where we're outside of the bounds of time, and we're seeing the heavenly temple operating despite the loss of the temple in Jerusalem in 70. And we're seeing the angels offering sacrifices and prayers. And we see Jesus Christ in the heavens. And so we see him operating as a messianic figure there. And then we bounce back to Earth, and we see these weird symbolic visions of monsters and dragons and armies made of locusts and various other sort of strange things. And then we bounce back to the heavens again. And then we, at the end of the book, see the judgment of Rome and this future New Jerusalem. At some point in the distant future, is it heaven? Is it on Earth? Or are these two spaces connecting? So John is playing with time and space. I mean, it makes sense. He's having a vision. He's having an out-of-body experience. And I think some of that confusion, some of that ambiguity might be intentional, because on the one hand, he is thinking about a real conflict that is about to happen. John, like a lot of Second Temple Jews, believed that he and his audience were living in the last days of the end of days. They're right at the edge. Things are about to get going, right? But even though he's thinking of history this way, he's also offering his audience an opportunity to experience it now. Even though he seems to believe it could happen in their lifetime, he's encouraging them to prepare themselves for the possibility of martyrdom through the text itself, through reading this text aloud, through saying the prayers, through peering through John's eyes into the heavenly realm and into the future. They're experiencing this kingdom of God, and it's ushering in the present moment. So even within the use of the text, the liturgical use of the text, he is also blurring time and space. So they're almost actualizing it in the present, even though this is also something that will happen in the future. So it's a messy thing. It's a messy text, and that's what makes it fun.
Does that way he plays with time allow it to continue to find new roots, because he's expecting it to come imminently,
Yes.
And when it doesn't, well, the time in the book is really sloppy or messy, or,
Yes.
ooh, maybe you weren't quite right in reading. So
Yes.
does that end up is that one of the things that allows communities to continue to return and reinterpret this over and over again?
And the symbolic nature of the history that he is outlining, right? So for a Second Temple Jewish listener, they would see images of a woman sitting on 7 hills, and they'd be like, aha, clearly that's Rome. Now, for someone sitting there reading this text 2,000 years later, they're not going to think Rome. They're going to think, someplace in Europe or something. Or they're going to think that Babylon is New York. And in fact, there was paintings after 9/11 that imagined the fall of the two towers as being related to the fall of Babylon, right? So we see the ambiguity of this imagery, and also this distance from the interpretive toolkit of the first century allows for these texts to have any number of meanings. But also I do think the heavenly component to this also allows for that, right? Like this vision of a heaven that's outside of time and space, this is something that lots of listeners and readers can find comfort in, and to enter into the idea that any reader anywhere can join the angelic choir and become divinized in some way, become angelic, imagine themselves in a future resurrected state, praying in the heavens, praying in the heavenly temple, is attractive. And you can see how this text has so much draw. I mean, even the visions in Revelation 4 through 5, the liturgical bits, they get worked into Christian liturgy as well. So it has a lot of draw. It has a lot of utility.
that draw is something that continues to pull people back in. And in that, as people imagine themselves as the community that it's speaking to through their framework, through their time, whatever it is, feels like this is the text that people pull out as the roadmap of, okay, here's the thing, and I'm going to code break now and let me identify these individuals. If the time aspect of it is a lot more complicated and back and forthing, and the symbolism is maybe both more complicated and less complicated at the same time, if we can jump back to that first audience, are they supposed to think of this as a roadmap in any way? Or are they reading it in this pool of other texts less as a roadmap and more of like a conversation with these other things, and they're going to have a different draw altogether?
I think they're probably reading it as a roadmap.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, it is a text that allows them in their synagogues or home churches, wherever they're hanging out in the first century, to get a foretaste of the world to come, of, to imagine themselves in the heavenly temple worshiping and offering sacrifices, even as the earthly temple in Jerusalem has just been destroyed by the Romans. So it offers comfort and catharsis. But it is a roadmap because in Revelation 2-3, the urgency, the reason why they need to shape up and stop eating meat sacrificed to idols and keep the commandments of God. And even in Revelation 14, there is this group of people, the 144,000, which seems to be John's Jewish followers of Jesus. And they have such a high standard of, they need to have avoided saying anything impure, lying. They need to essentially be virgins for life. And in addition to doing all these other things, not eating meat sacrificed to idols, and et cetera, they need to be hyper pure because they're holy warriors. Because they're going to fight on Mount Zion with Christ, who is going to return and, finally fulfill this Jewish eschatological vision of the messianic warrior who brings in the kingdom of God. And they're participants. They need to be ready. So it matters what they do in this life because they could be the recruits. They could be the conscripts for this war. So, and if they want to be, and of course the implication is, of course, you would want to be. You don't want to be left behind, right. And not in that way. You don't want to be like the guy that's still at home that doesn't get to fight. So of course you want to make yourself ready. Of course you want to live a holy life. So it is a roadmap in that what you do in this life matters because in this life you might be conscripted to fight with the returning cosmic Christ, who is going to defeat Rome, this empire that has created so much trauma for you, right? Destroying the temple, destroying Jerusalem, probably enslaving a lot of the Judean population. They're probably these communities in Asia Minor, I assume, are under a lot of pressure social. Everyone's looking at them side-eyed, being like, are you a potential rebel? Were you, So, and then there might be taxation issues and all of this stuff. They're under a lot of pressure. In addition to being followers of Jesus and maybe being also under those pressures of this weird group. So, yeah, they need to live a holy life now because they're going to be God's agents in an imminent defeat of this enemy that looms over them.
Is there a way that the spiritual aspect of this allows them to feel like they're getting to be rebellious and participate in this rebellion without having to do anything that might get them in trouble now, given all of these different pressures that are lurking around? Is it kind of a get out of jail free card? I'm doing my thing. I'm going to be in the 144,000. It's just not today, so I'm going to be ready.
You could read it that way. Although some of the things that John is asking of his readers or listeners wouldn't be great. Okay, so you're going to stop eating meat sacrificed to idols. That sounds easy to us modern readers, but it wouldn't have been because it's everywhere. It's not like you have meat every day like we do. You just go to McDonald's. No. It's expensive. There are certain places where you get it in the marketplace. Where is that meat coming from? Oftentimes from sacrifices. If you want to go strike up a bargain for some sort of economic deal that you're going to do, maybe you're going to start getting into silk business. I don't know. You're going to go to a community of people, of merchants who are hanging out and having a banquet and potentially serving meat sacrificed to idols. So and you also can't participate in all the cultural holidays. Maybe you don't believe, maybe you're not actually worshiping these other gods. Maybe you're just hanging out, networking, being a good citizen. All of that's off the table, at least if you take John seriously. So it would be isolating. It would be, he's really encouraging his listeners to become a separatist movement and fully to not integrate, to not assimilate. So he is offering instructions that would require a lot of them socially, economically. Even though maybe they're not actually laying down their lives, we don't have any evidence that we have widespread martyrdom in the first century.
Right.
Although they did expect, John clearly expects it. But socially and economically, it's not a low stakes ask.
So even if it's not participating in open rebellion right now, it still doesn't get you out of doing everything. Because it feels like one of those things, if you're looking at it, that you're like, oh, is some of this time messiness a nice way to say, I'm really doing it right now, guys. Don't worry, you do your thing. I'm also participating. Mm-hmm. But maybe a little less clear. And when you're talking about the food sacrificed idols and the difficulty of avoiding that kind of meat, that feels like one of the aspects of this that, especially if you're reading it in the wrong context and removed from the daily life aspects of this, make some of these things feel easier or harder than maybe they were in reality. Are there other parts of those asks that feel like that where you go, well, if you're thinking of this in the reality of their lived world and what this really means for them, that suddenly feel like a much bigger part of this that we overlook because we're looking at the beast or the numbers and you're like, oh, you're reading right past this part.
Yeah.
That is a huge ask that the audience would have been uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hate to go back to my own research, but one of the things that I do in my work is thinking about prayer. So when we think about prayer and we say something like, oh, I'm a prayer warrior, like you don't actually mean that in a literal way, usually. It just means that you're really diligent and you're, fighting for God and so you're thinking maybe in military terms, but you're not actually thinking about you're praying someone to death, right? Like you're not, but they probably are in the book of Revelation. And this fits not only with a Second Temple Jewish context, where if you bop over to the Dead Sea Scrolls and you look at the War Scroll, they're praying their enemies to death, right? Like they have a prayer before they go to battle, a prayer in the middle of the battle, and a prayer after the battle, and then the Romans are defeated, right? It's great. And there's more prayers than there is actual fighting in the War Scroll. And this is the Qumran tradition from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this is not unusual for ancient Mediterranean context. We have a lot of rituals and prayers and curses and invocations. We have tons and tons of texts and inscriptions and pottery and all this stuff that indicates a world where words do things and in a very physical, tangible way in the material world. And it's so easy to look at prayer and, oh, it's a beautiful thing. Oh, it's a theological reflection on the nature of God. Oh, it's praise or it's conversation. And it can be all of those things. But also in the ancient world, they're really thinking prayer works. And prayer can actually set you apart, and I think this is what's happening in Revelation, and make you a more powerful army than the next guy, right? Because if your God is more powerful and your prayers are the catalyst to get God going, to get him doing things in the world, taking vengeance on behalf of his people, well, then you're the more powerful warrior because you have the more powerful divine agent at your behest.
Can you say more about the concept around words in the way this text is thinking about them and the audience is thinking about them? Because that feels like something that comes up when we talk about the ancient world and the shift in understanding that. But for this particular context, how do you see that coming through the text in ways that we miss?
Well, one of the ways is on a narrative level. So prayer there are lots of cycles of violence that happen, and prayer always bookends violence. So you have prayers that are happening either in the heavens or prayers on earth that the audience is implicitly participating in that always are the precursor to some sort of violence in the narrative. And this gets missed, that prayer always happens before violence. It always seems to trigger violence in the narrative. And even the violence throughout Revelation is highly ritualized. The very first opening sequence, so we have these seals. We have this mysterious book that's in the heavens, and nobody can read this book except for the Lamb who looks like a lion, which is clearly a reference to Christ. And he can open this book, and he can unseal the 7 seals. And with each of these seals, some violence happens. But before he can even begin unsealing this book, there are prayers. There are prayers in the cosmos of the angels, and there are prayers from people on earth, the prayers of the saints that are participating in this, and the prayers of the animals and all of creation. So this prayer is the trigger for him unsealing this book that then has all this violence that happens on earth. And even within the seals, we see allusions to human prayers. Prayers of the souls that are under the altar, the heavenly altar. And they demand, God, why haven't you given us vengeance yet? And he's like, hold on, we're almost there, and then I will. And the very next couple seals, he offers vengeance, right? Starts killing their enemies. So prayer is intimately bound up with God's violence. The prayers of the righteous, intimately bound up with God's violence. And the prayers of the righteous are merging with those of the angels throughout this text. Because prayer is a way for the righteous to sort of imagine themselves or sort of step into their future divinized selves, their resurrected heavenly, angelic, priestly selves. Prayer is a way to tap into that in the present. So we see a lot of imagery of prayers on earth, breaching the heavenly temple and being offered as a sacrifice in the heavenly temple, and then triggering divine violence that follows, because prayer works. Right? Prayers on earth, both the martyrs, those who are dead under the altar, but also prayers of regular, ordinary followers of Jesus who are offering their prayers on earth, they work. They can trigger God to act on their behalf and to overthrow the Roman Empire presumably in their lifetime.
We talked a little bit earlier about the misidentifying the audience, and then people maybe plugging themselves in as the audience incorrectly. And you mentioned a group, the Branch Davidians, who have participated in this way. Given the intimate role between violence and religious activity in this text, when people do that, are they still participating accidentally correctly with the text and some dominant themes in the text?
Yes, in a way. They are recognizing the violence in the text. But then incorrectly, and then I think this text is hyper-specific. It's for first century followers of Jesus,
right,
who think that they are living in the end of days.
Okay, because that was going to be the question, like if they are correct or incorrect, like how do we, it feels like one of those books that gets applied by a lot of people in a lot of ways that we go, that's not great.
Right.
We wouldn't love to see you doing that.
Right.
And so what is the recourse to those individuals who are saying, no, this is about religion and about violence and sacred violence, and it's all right there. So what are you going to say about it?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, too, it's first century audience is hyper-specific. But even though they are participating, right, both in the future, they're going to fight on Mount Zion. The Jewish followers of Jesus are going to fight on Mount Zion with Christ. They're also participating through willingness to make the hard decisions in this life, potentially undergo martyrdom. And they're also participating through prayer, through thinking of themselves and their communities as intimately connected with the heavenly temple, its cycles and rhythms, and the divine praise of the cosmos, of the angels, of creation. So in that way, when you think about it in those terms, we can think about how the end of days didn't happen, right? So perhaps, one potential religious reading of this text could be, well, maybe you just didn't live a holy enough life. Maybe you weren't praying hard enough. Indeed, this is a common interpretation for lots of other Jewish texts, right? Maybe we just got it wrong. Maybe we didn't live into the present moment in the way that we were supposed to, so it's been delayed. So potentially you could read it like that, but I think it's really hard to escape the ethnic particularity of this text. This is a text that's written for Jewish followers of Jesus who are, fighting against the Roman Empire. And so does any of this hold true if it's no longer the Roman Empire, if it's no longer Jewish followers of Jesus living in Asia Minor?
The audience becomes exceptionally important.
The audience is exceptionally important.
Yes. As it always is.
Yes.
But maybe in some ways particular to this book, it has implications that maybe other readings don't.
Very much so. And I think one of the things about Revelation is its interpretive tradition. It's been read as a universal text, as a text that's meant for all followers of Jesus anywhere. And I'm not saying that there's not a place for Gentile, non-Jewish followers of Jesus in the text. They do appear, and like Revelation 7, for instance, but they're not the focus. They're not the stars of this narrative. And in displacing the first century Jewish readers as the people that are John's intended audience, it does lend itself to all these misreadings, because if it's a universal text, it's for any Christian anywhere, and not for Jewish followers of Jesus, and then Jewish followers of Jesus in this particular historical moment. So I think yes, the context does really matter for interpreting Revelation.
Can I ask you about one of those audiences or groups who plug themselves in? And you used this line earlier, right? Nobody wants to be left behind.
Right.
And for a segment of this audience listening, that's the name that maybe you know best when you're thinking of Revelation, is you don't know Revelation. Maybe you haven't actually read Revelation, but you read Left Behind.
Right.
Or you watched one of those movies. How do you see that lining up with kind of where we've talked through in ways that, are they an example of all the things that go wrong with this? Do they get a bad reputation for being all of the bad things about this? Because it feels like they are doing a lot of what we're saying, hey, it's not about you. You're not the audience. You shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. The funny thing about even the term left behind is the idea of like the rapture doesn't appear anywhere in Revelation. And so much of the reading of Revelation assumes things that actually are coming from other traditions and other texts. Oh, it's there. Actually, it's not. And the rapture is a great one. It doesn't appear in Revelation. That's in the Gospel of Matthew, right? It doesn't appear in Revelation. And even in the Gospel of Matthew, when it talks about like, I think you're in a field and one gets taken and one gets left behind. Another great way to read that, and I think maybe the more viable way to read that, is actually the person who gets left behind, that's who you want to be. Because the person who gets taken, they might be going to judgment, right? And this also fits with the Jewish reading, because in a Christian reading, you want to go to heaven. Heaven is heaven is the goal. But in a Jewish reading of the eschaton, earth will be heaven. You want to be on earth. It's going to be remade into a paradise. And so if you don't understand Jewish eschatological thinking, it makes sense. Oh, clearly, you want to be the person who's taken. But in a Jewish reading of this text, no. You want to be the person who is still staying in their field, still picking their grapes. And that whole text, that whole idea of a rapture, it isn't even in Revelation. So it doesn't appear.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be one of the things I wanted to ask was, given all the weird stuff that is here, there's also weird stuff that gets tacked in like that isn't there. Is there anything else in addition to rapture? Is that kind of the big one that people need to go, hey, get this out of your mind first and return to say, there feels like a lot in this book you have to strip away to try to go back to reading those things. And we've put a lot of things on the table for people. So if someone is feeling there's a lot to deal with, could you give them the top 3 or 4 to say, deal with these things as you're reading? They go, I want to read it for the first time. I've only watched Left Behind, but you've inspired me to open it up and go through it. The top things they should keep in mind as they're going through, and they can come to more as they get comfortable with those.
The top things to read as they're going through. Well, don't be a narcissist. Don't assume everything in the text is about you, which is a common Christian interpretation of this text. Oh, we've got weird locust sort of creatures. That must be helicopters. Those helicopters must relate to X war, and that war is bad, and those political figures that voted for that war are bad, and therefore I'm going to situate myself on this side of some sort of contemporary political or religious divide. Don't let the text make you more sectarian as a person, more looking to find enemies under every rock and behind every corner, which is one way Revelation has been read. And yes, it's symbolic. And yes, the symbols allow us to interpret this text, or have allowed Christians to have interpreted this text in a lot of different ways. But if you understand it's a first century text, those symbols are very particular. Don't assume they're about you. And definitely don't let this text encourage you to start seeing enemies everywhere, because that would be really bad, and it has led to really bad ends. So that would be one thing I would say. And the other thing is to take, maybe if you were reading this as a religious person, to take seriously that for John, what it means to be a follower of Jesus is hard. It's not easy, right? It's not an easy thing. It means making difficult decisions, sacrificing your own comfort, maybe economic, social comfort, doing the hard thing, doing religion even when it's hard, and even being willing to sacrifice yourself on behalf of what you believe. Maybe not go to war and kill your enemies, but being willing to be killed. So for John, religion has costs. And it's not going out and, finding enemies and killing them, but it's being willing to be drawn up into this cosmic conflict. So if you're taking this text seriously, maybe it means that in your day-to-day life, you make the hard decisions when it comes to your own religious practice, right? You live an intentional life, even when it's hard. And the third thing that I would say is if you're reading Revelation for the first time, maybe start with other texts. Maybe start with Daniel and start with the book of Enoch, and reading those texts and seeing those symbols might also help you understand what's happening in Revelation. So I think those are all really important, and I could list others, but maybe start there.
I think that's a wonderful starting list, and I love starting somewhere else. If understanding that audience is so important, start with what that audience is thinking about before coming this, so you aren't the narcissist.
So you aren't the narcissist. Yeah.
Those things come together so wonderfully to say, come into some of those things first and then get over it. You learn what you're reading about.
Start with the milk, then go to the meat.
One way or another. And yes, this is a part of why I'd say, as we're wrapping up, maybe part of why we haven't done Revelation yet is because there is so much to unpack.
And homework.
So many homework assignments and readings to do and things to unpeel as you're coming through this. So as we're finishing here, if you're thinking, I still have questions, leave a comment down below. I'm very happy to say I can walk down a couple flights of stairs and knock on a door and say, pretty please, we have questions. Could you come back to maybe unpack some more of this in the future? But for today, Dr. Haigh, let's leave this here. I think plenty of homework for people to do. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to talk about Revelation.
Always happy. Hopefully you're happy to hear about Revelation. If you have questions, again, send them our way. Like and subscribe wherever you find us. It helps us. Hopefully it helps you stay in touch with us. But for this week, for all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, until next time.